Hi everyone. I'm going to read pages from my novel Draft in Progress, Rough Draft. Charles knocked softly. When there was no response, he gently opened the door and entered the house. Leonard was sprawled in his brown leather chair in the center of the room. He wore an old purple bathrobe that was untied, frayed, and barely covering one leg. His head lolled to one side, eyes closed, and his mouth gaped open. Leonard usually kept his hair shaved monk short, but as Charles stepped toward him, he saw white curling wisps floating above his ears. His face was unshaven. A smell of old coffee grounds and alcohol and overripe fruit permeated the room. Cobwebs grew like cottony weeds upon the walls and ceiling. Charles paused where he stood. He and Leonard had briefly been lovers long ago. He stared now at his nakedness. The thought that Leonard might be dead flared up in his mind. He went to his friend and lightly shook his arm. He was not dead. "Leonard, wake up!" Charles kneeled and rubbed Leonard's arm more vigorously. "No, no, no!" Leonard's eyes abruptly opened. "No!" His mouth clamped shut and then opened. Charles waited. "It's you," Leonard said at last. "It's me." Leonard hoisted himself up and pulled the bathrobe around himself. Charles said, "Were you having a bad dream?" "Indeed I was. Most astonishing. I was dreaming of my father. Now why on earth would I do that? The poor man has been dead longer than most people on the planet have been alive." He coughed and cleared his throat and moved his tongue over cracked lips. He peered at Charles. "You might have phoned. I am not entirely decent." Charles felt a surge of affection. He smiled. "If I can't count on you to be indecent, what's left?" "Where have you been, Charles? I'd almost given you up for dead." Charles lifted his head and stared in the direction where, just 2 miles away, Tonio was smiling and accepting money from strangers. He said, "Well, dear, when I walked in, I thought you were dead. You look terrible, and your place looks worse." Leonard rubbed his fists in his eyes and stared out from his chair. "I've had a few setbacks," he said. Charles stood, his legs tingling. He flexed one ankle and then the other and shifted his weight from side to side. "Can I get you anything?" "A martini would be lovely." "It's not even noon." "Is it?" "To understand the unimportance of time is the gate of wisdom." Was that Bertrand Russell or Oscar Wilde? Well, Wilde had the eye for boys, and that's what counts. Charles said, "You had an eye for me once." "Yes, I did, and I still do." "We should celebrate my eye with an enormous martini, with lots of gin." "Oh, sweetheart, I love you. Don't ever change." "I'm glad you found the time to stop by. I thought I'd lost you forever." "As a matter of fact," Leonard waved his arms, "don't explain, never explain, or divulge your age, or, if you must, lie." He laid his hands flat on his legs. "Let me tidy up your kitchen. I doubt there is a single clean glass in this house." Leonard scratched his knee. As a virtue, cleanliness is vastly overrated. Leonard's kitchen comprised a sink, a hot plate on a counter, and an ancient refrigerator that groaned with resistance each time its door was opened. It was one of the things Charles loved about Leonard, and also Leonard's cottage, the sense that time could be fixed, that not everything had to be replaced, that you could live in much the same conditions and in the same environment for years, decades, avoiding the crushing flow of change. Of course, Charles knew it was an illusion. He had only to look at their aging bodies to recognize that. And yet coming to Leonard's still reminded him of those first days after he and Leonard had met on the beach, not long after Charles had fled Los Angeles, had fled the old story he had now come to Leonard to speak of. And the cottage was a haven, a place apart. That day of their first encounter, Charles had sat in Leonard's chair, the very same brown leather chair his dear friend sat in now. And Leonard had kneeled as if in prayer before his spread open legs, and Charles kept his eyes open the whole time, and Charles held on to the rhythm of Leonard's head with rigid fingers, and he tried not to tremble, and he stared at the delicate cobwebs on the redwood ceiling. Charles was 24 then, nearly the same age as Tonio now. The small sink was filled with unwashed dishes. Charles turned on the hot water tap. He called out to Leonard, "Should I put a record on?" Leonard didn't hear him, or he had gone back to sleep. Charles picked up a sponge that was sodden with old, smelly water. He frowned and threw it in the small trash bucket under the sink. Perhaps it had been a mistake to come to Leonard's, expecting him to help Charles resolve the dilemma of the mother he wasn't sure he wanted to see again. Did he want to see her? Why hadn't he just said no, or hung up the phone? He turned off the hot water and pulled a chair from the table and sat next to Leonard. Leonard fixed a blue, watery stare on him. "Oh, good," he said. "You're still here. I'd been wondering if you were a dream." Charles smiled. "I've been called dreamy once or twice in my time. And rightly so. Now where is my drink? Do you want to tell me about your dream? It seemed upsetting." "Not especially." "There are setbacks?" "Not especially." "I should fix you something to eat, but something tells me your cupboard is bare." "How is that juicy boy morsel you met at the community center treating you?" "Tonio?" Charles brought his hand to his face. "I may be in over my head," he said. "I think I love him." "And is the sentiment returned?" "I think so. But he's 25. What am I doing with a 25-year-old? "Are you afraid that once the initial bloom passes, he will leave you for someone younger?" Charles caught the intensity in Leonard's gaze and looked away. "That was different," he said. "You and me, we were just, you know." Leonard pushed himself up in the chair, a motion that appeared well practiced, as if he were used to the slump sending him downward. "Never mind about the past," Leonard said. Charles gave a hard laugh. "Huh," he said. "Wouldn't that be lovely?" "What's on your mind, dear?" Leonard fussed with his robe, arranging it over his legs. "Something the matter between you and Tonio? You know I wish you every happiness, even if it means I see you less often. I am capable of generous philosophical thinking, you know." Charles stood. "It's not Tonio," he said, suddenly upset. "Or at least, not exactly. It has to do with my mother." "Thank you."